We're so glad to have Heather and Stephanie back with us for today's ACES webinar. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Patsy. Just to let you all know, at the last webinar, our first webinar, we were together and we are separated by a mere few miles in the internet, but we can make this work today. So thank you all for joining us in the second of 3 foundational webinar series, all focused on ACES TIF, as well as the course that is in the Canvas. Thank you for joining.
All right, and we will find out in a minute or two. I think we have a question coming up asking who joined us for webinar 1, but we will do some quick introductions in case people do not know who we are. And we'd also love for you to share in the chat. And maybe because we are a small group right now, we could just use our microphones to share. That might be nice. So I will start. My name is Stephanie Sommers. I work for Minneapolis Adult Education. I've been working in this field for about 25 years. And like Heather, I was one of the original ABE practitioners who worked on creating the ACES TIF product, both the document and the training that took place back when this was first rolled out. And Heather and I also worked a couple years ago on updating ACES TIF because it had been 10 years already since its original creation, and we wanted to kind of give a facelift to the materials. So that's me. It's great to see you all. And what about you, Heather?
Well, I'm over here in South Minneapolis. I have been with Minneapolis Adult Education for I think this is my 25th year. So we have about the same amount of experience working in the field of adult education and working with so many different learners, from ELLs to HSC, high school equivalency. It has been wonderful to be part of the ACES process from the originals. Thank you, Patsy. We are the ACES originals, but we also have been here trying to create the updates for today's ABE environment. If you can, please share, great, in the chat.
Or if anyone would like, I think we could also have people, if people wanted to turn their cameras on for a minute and wave, that's also perfectly fine. If people feel more comfortable being in the chat, that also works. Oh, okay, Lori says she's unable. That's okay, Lori. Thank you for letting us know. And thank you, Krista, for doing your introductions in the chat. And I see we've also got Dawn and Jennifer and Stacy here today. Thank you all.
Wonderful. I'll move us along, Stephanie, just to show the agenda for our webinar time today. We'll give a quick introduction and course overview with the final assignment for those of you who are enrolled in the ACES Foundations course. We'll take a look at one of the categories, critical thinking. We'll look at the self-management category and then wrap up with questions.
All right, and thank you. I know some of you are saying you don't have mics today. That's all right. The chat can always work as well, and we will read that out for folks as comments come in. So I see Dawn, 20 plus years. Excellent. All right, so let's continue.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that link to the full TIF, Carly, because it might be appreciated for those of you if you don't already have one.
All right, so here is that question I alluded to a little while ago. Let's have you put in the chat, yes or no, if you attended the first webinar on November 12th. So this webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars, and you certainly don't have to you certainly don't have to have attended the first webinar. This is not the type of story you won't be able to follow if you weren't here from the beginning, but we just thought it'd be good to know. So yes, Dawn was here, Patsy, Jennifer, fantastic. Lori was here. So it looks like I think just about all of us were here for the first webinar. Fantastic. And if you were not here for the first webinar, we are going to put a link in the chat to the recording. So in webinar 1, we went over a lot of background, I guess, or sort of we did a deeper dive into the course and getting enrolled in the course and things like that. And we were not going to repeat that today, but if you missed that information and you would find that useful, you can watch the recording on this through the Minnesota ABE PD YouTube channel, and the link is in the chat. Thank you, Carly. All right. Great, and I think we can keep going.
Thanks, Stephanie. We want to find out your ACES basis. So many of you were here at the first webinar, and we thank you for that. We also saw an uptick in the number of people joining the ACES Foundations course. So that was really great after the first webinar 2 weeks ago. So are you currently enrolled in the ACES Foundation course? If you are, you could type a 1 in the chat. If you are enrolled, you could let us know how far along you are. And 3, have you participated in other ACES?
All right, and Krista is saying no, it's not applicable, and yes. Okay, so you're not taking the course, so it's not applicable, and you have done other training. Fantastic. And Jennifer says, yep, same thing. Okay, so it looks like a lot of us are not in the course, and that's okay, because especially with today's webinar, we are not going to be spending a lot of time talking about the course specifically. We're going to be spending more time talking about the those 2 categories that Patsy mentioned, critical thinking and self-management. Nevertheless, if you are interested in joining the course, thank you to Carly for putting a link in the chat. If that's something you'd like to do, maybe to get some CEUs or just to give yourself a general refresher. Okay, great. Thank you for that information. And then we're going to take you back and remind you about what we did last time. So in our last webinar, which it sounds like most of you attended, we ended by asking people to think about a student with whom you have worked. And even if you're not working on the course actively right now, we're hoping that you still maybe spent a few minutes thinking about your student and your student's goal or goals, and how using the TIF, and in particular the effective communication or learning strategies categories, would help your student to reach their goal. And we reminded folks that if by chance you're not in a classroom and you're not working with students, you could use the learner profile of Myra to do this activity. So we are hoping that some of you did this and that you had some time to reflect on a student or learner with whom you're working and how ACES TIF might help them to reach their goals. So we would love to have you share that information in the chat if you are able to. And I know you might have to kind of poke around to find if you don't have this handy, but if you can think about these 2 skill categories, effective communication and learning strategies, we'd love to have people share a little bit. You can share in the chat. We'd also be happy to have folks raise their hand and share using their voices. But it would be great to hear from one or two people. So Heather, we are sharing our assignments here. And Krista has just typed in the chat, a lot of my students work as PCAs. Many want to do the nursing assistant training program and go to college and then on for nursing. Effective communication is great for everyone, but specifically for working with elders in care facilities. This is a great skill set to be working on. Yes, I love that you pointed out effective communication is important for all of us as adults. And then I agree, in particular, in a healthcare setting, I think there are a lot of ways that a person really needs to hone their effective communication. Like I'm thinking of cross-cultural communication. I'm thinking of, yes, maybe intergenerational communication. Being able to even, I worked for a short amount of time. My assignment with Minneapolis was working at Abbott Northwestern Hospital. And I was working with some staff there doing some training. And I was told a big thing that the patients want is for staff who come into their room to be able to make small talk. And so we would practice small talk on a regular basis. Just, what's the weather like today? How was your weekend? Did you, are you looking forward to the holidays? Those kinds of general questions that we ask, but that students might need practice with in order to really feel comfortable using it in the workplace. All right. Okay, well, thank you, Krista, for sharing what thoughts you had. And if anyone else wants to share, oh, and Krista says small talk is so key. Yeah, the hospital, that was that one of their number one requests was that everyone from people who came in to do room cleaning to people who came in to deliver meals were able to make some amount of small talk with the staff. Fantastic.
Great. And thank you for doing some of the assignment. I think that's wonderful.
All right, so we can continue. And just as, yeah, here's Myra again, in case anyone would like that for next time, because we will be asking you to complete a little bit more of the final assignment between this webinar and webinar 3. Okay.
Yeah, and I just like to point out, Stephanie, as I did during the first webinar, that you created this image of a fictional Myra through AI in Canva, right? It was AI generated. I think that was pretty cool.
I certainly did. So the details about Myra that are written down are sort of a composite of many learners I've worked with. I'm sure you'll see some familiarity with your own learners there, but Myra's image was created in Canva. Absolutely. All right, I think we can continue then.
Yeah, and this was just to let you know again that the Transitions Integration Framework, or the TIF, can be found on the Atlas website. There's a big section dedicated to ACES and TIF, and we'll be working with the full TIF today.
All right, so we are going to start digging into these category specific skills. And just as a reminder, critical thinking is module 5 in the course. And if you are looking in the TIF, in the complete TIF, which we're using because it contains the activity examples, you will look on page 23 to find the critical thinking category. I'll also just remind folks that for today's webinar, just like last time, we'll start by talking about the skills in the category. Then we'll talk a little bit about using the ACES process, and then we'll talk a bit about routines. All right.
Wonderful. And Stephanie, I just wanted to point out again that the images that you see here are also icons that are in the foundations course. So this light bulb is that idea of critical thinking, the puzzle that just opens up our brains. You all can read along. I don't think I need to read. I don't have to show off my fluency skills, but you can read what the critical thinking category comprises of. Here is an AI generated image of adult learners using critical thinking skills. I created this AI image with ChatGPT. So I wanted to show an arrangement of a diverse adult learner population using critical thinking skills. I think there's an overuse of laptops, but that could be part of AI, right? At least for me, but I like to see that we have this wide array of adult learners using their critical thinking skills. You can see teamwork, diversity, and some other things generated by ChatGPT.
All right, so in the critical thinking category in the TIF, there are 4 main skills, and then each skill has some sub-skills. Skill 1 is organize, analyze, and illustrate relationships between components, items, and ideas. Skill 2 is solve problems. Skill 3 is use information to draw conclusions and make decisions. And skill 4 is recognize bias, assumptions, and multiple perspectives. So then on the next slide, we will look at some examples of activities that would build those skills.
Here are some of the activities. They can be found also in the TIF, but you can see on the left, students sequence and organize events in chronological order using pictures with dates or simple sentences. This could be at a very low level. Maybe an intermediate level, students read passages of individuals who rose above their barriers to accomplish their goals. Students lead a discussion on the goals and barriers noted from the text. Students write about their own goals and how they are similar or different from the text. I really like how it goes back to that text. And you can see another example that students conduct research to find and distinguish between primary and secondary source documents, then write an extended response on which is more valid. And that would be for that higher level, perhaps adult diploma or high school equivalency level student.
Okay, and as Heather was just mentioning, when we do look at the complete activity grids in the TIF, the activity suggestions are organized on a continuum of complexity. So in the leftmost column, we have activities that might be most appropriate for our beginning level learners. The middle column is intermediate level, and the far right column is the more high intermediate or advanced level. And as another reminder, when the TIF was created, we know that our adult learners have different goals and that they are on different paths in their lives. And so the TIF includes these activity examples in 3 different life contexts: community, school, and work. And we know these are contexts that all adult learners need to be able to navigate. And that's why we chose them for the different activity examples. So what we would like you to do now is going to be an activity from the course, and it involves looking at the different examples in the TIF and choosing one that you might like to use with your students. So we will show you those directions.
There you go. And again, as Stephanie said, this is part of that course. It's module 5.5, digging in, and all of the different modules within the course have similar numbering so that you can see how it's repeated. But let's continue to explore the critical thinking category. Looking on pages 24 to 30, think about a sample activity that interests you and briefly respond. So you can type in the chat, which CT skill and sub-skill does the activity address? Briefly describe the activity you choose. How might you use this activity with your students? So think about one of those sample activities, again, from the full TIF, and how could you use this activity? What tweaks would you make to make it work? Share in the chat. I'm already thinking of things that I am going to do maybe tonight with my students.
Yes, and if some of you might have a very, retro copy of the TIF, a spiral bound copy, that's what I'm going to look at. For other folks, Carly did chat out a link to the full TIF. So you can just click on that, and we know it's going to take people a couple minutes to look. And so that's what we'll do. We're going to give time for exploring, and then we'll share our ideas. Yes, it is the OG TIF.
I have mine all bookmarked, written upon, and I have the original one and then the updated one. But Stephanie, you and I are teaching the same unit right now within our social studies course. And
Yes.
I've been focusing on a timeline for learners so that they can understand that chronological, critical thinking about what would happen next, especially with regards to United States history. Even with higher level learners, making them think critically with that timeline activity worked very well in class last night.
Yes. And I was just thinking, based on Patsy's comment here, it's retro circa 2014. So it's not quite old enough that if it was a song, they wouldn't be playing it on the oldies station yet. But it might be like one of those lunchtime surprise numbers that they pull out as a as a little bit of a throwback. Maybe it counts as Throwback Thursday type material. Yes. Yeah, absolutely, Heather. The idea of sequencing information, as you mentioned, I've been working on that as well, talking also about cause and effect. I know we've been studying a number of different wars in our history unit, and we've had to talk about what events caused a war and what were some of the effects of the war, which is another great critical thinking skill. Carly's talking about how within the activities examples here, there's different ones talking about using graphic organizers. Yes, I definitely see that on page 27, for example. Okay, and Krista says skill 1, subset B. I'm going to turn to the appropriate page. Yep, okay, categorizing. Yes, the classic. Heather and I are both citizenship teachers as well, Krista. And my goodness, I cannot probably even count the number of times we have used a graphic organizer to visually, organize our information about the 3 branches of government. Absolutely. And what their responsibilities are and what their who's in that branch and where they work, all of that information. Interesting question for students. Who is the president now?
Yes,
Mm.
it is certainly the question that a number of our students are asking, Krista, and we, at least in the class that I'm working with, I'm letting them know, depends when your interview is, okay, and the date. So yeah, it does bring up that idea. Students have to think critically then and sequence that timeline. When do we have our new president? I see Dawn is looking at solving problems, examples of reading real life stories. Yeah, exactly, Dawn. And this is something that happens occasionally within maybe an orientation class or a class where students can see some of the barriers to potentially be joining an adult education program. So having that discussion on how to overcome their own barriers, whether it be transportation, childcare, a number of other barriers. So thank you for bringing that up too.
And I was just looking at the same skill, skill 1, sub-skill B, and it talks about sorting things by fact or opinion. And it was making me think about when we all used to use Jamboard to do those kinds of manipulating activities. And of course, that has gone away. But I know, Heather, you have done some of that kind of work using Padlet, where you have students post their comments under the correct discussion chain, yes, using Padlet, and that's worked out for you.
Yeah, it has, especially around fact and opinion. I'll put a statement up and then they would have to say, I believe this is a fact or an opinion, and then produce evidence. I've done it around also primary, secondary source. Again, higher level, but they have to be thinking critically, especially if their goal is to get that high school equivalency.
Mm-hmm. Great. What about anyone else? Would anyone else like to share an activity that they think looks interesting or that they might be able to use in their classroom? I will describe my favorite activity of all time because I'm looking at page 7 for skill 3, and I see that it talks about using a T-chart, which reminds me of my, Heather knows what this is because I've talked about it 100 times.
It's
My
great.
classic true false dictation, where I have students make a T-chart, which is basically just folding a piece of paper in half, and then one column is true and the other column is false. And I dictate a sentence. In fact, Krista, I've used this in citizenship class. So I dictate a sentence and students have to listen. Then they have to think, and I do, yes, use these gestures. You must listen and then think and then write. And so the sentence might be something like, the Supreme Court has 10 justices. And then they have to think, is that true or is that false? And then they write the sentence on the correct side of the chart based on whether it's true or false. And we've used it in citizenship class, and we've also used it after reading. When I taught a little bit lower level learners, we'd read a kind of a story or a simpler text, and then I'd pull out details from the text, and we'd use it that way as well. And it's always a favorite activity.
Yeah, the students really like that, Stephanie. And it is a good way, you're right, Krista, to review any sort of topic, pretty much. We do something similar with academic vocabulary, where students have to look at a sentence and determine not if the sentence is true or false, but if I am using the word in context. So this is their way not just to be learning the word, but to see it in a sentence. And so it works really well because students say they have to think about that word and the context of the sentence. It works really well for any sort of academic vocabulary review.
Yes, and I like it as well because it's a classic like low to no prep activity. You just have to come up with the sentences, but you don't really have to prepare anything ahead of time, since students can just fold that piece of paper in half. And it's also a great example of something we'll talk about in a little while, which is a learning task format, which is one of our ACES one of the ways that a TIFing method, excuse me, it is a TIFing method, one of the ways to practice ACES skills with any kind of content. So a learning task format means students learn how to do the task. So if you create like a document, that's a T-chart, you teach them how to do it. So we could start out using it for citizenship sentences. And then the next time we introduce it, maybe we use it for a story we read in class. And then maybe the next time we use it, we practice our vocabulary with it. But students understand how to fill out the chart. They understand the task. And so I can change the content and students are able to do the activity with confidence because they understand what it means, what the chart is, how it's completed.
There's so many skills in there. Learning strategies, effective communication, they have to be listening carefully, and then critical thinking. It's a wonderful way to scaffold all of those things into your lessons.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we can move on, and thank you to the folks who shared a little bit in the chat about some of the tasks they'd be interested in.
We now are going to look at the ACES process. This is repeated inside the course through every module of the 6 categories, and it is reviewing what the ACES process is. We'll show this brief video, and I'd like you all to just type in the chat if I am not able to get the video working, okay? I'm testing all of my technology skills here.
The ACES process allows you to effectively integrate transition skills into your instruction. It has 4 steps. A. Assess instruction, materials, or curriculum to identify where TIF skills are already addressed. C. Complement those materials to intentionally integrate TIF skills. E. Evaluate the outcomes after delivering the lesson or using the materials. S. Study and reflect on the lesson. What else do the students need? What else do I need? For our effective communication exploration today, we are going to spend time on the assess step and the complement step. These will take the bulk of our time. We will also quickly look at the evaluate step and the study and reflect steps of the ACES process.
All right, so in that video, I know she was talking about effective communication.
Well, one moment. Okay, I just have to tell YouTube to stop. Thank you.
You stopped.
They stopped.
So that video is one that is repeated throughout the course, and the basic explanation of the steps remains the same. And then when she gets into applying an example is when it becomes category specific. So I know she mentioned, or that when I say she, that was Leah Olson who was speaking in the video. And when she said effective communication, that's because it comes that came from the effective communication category, but again, the steps remain consistent, okay? So we are going to actually practice this process. So again, when we think of ACES as a process, the A stands for assess, the C stands for complement, the E is evaluate, and the S is study. And this process can actually be used when you're looking at any types of materials, whether you want to think about if those materials are CCRS aligned, whether you want to think about if they include good digital literacy skills and practice, whether you were really working with any type of skills framework. Going through these steps can really help you as you decide what else you need to add to your lesson or unit. Okay, and so we have pulled it's not really even a whole lesson here. This is just a graphic that appears on the National Weather Service website. And Carly has shared the link in the chat. Thank you, Carly. And so this is something that could be used this time of year, for example, in a class to talk with students about vocabulary around winter preparation. Okay. And so I want you to imagine you're with your students, you're in a class, you're showing them this website, and you're just kind of talking about the vocabulary. So things like first aid kit or jumper cables or spare tire. Okay. So you're in class, you've shared this link, or you're sharing the screen on a smartboard. You're talking about the vocabulary. So if you were just looking at the vocabulary, are there any critical thinking skills or sub-skills that you think you could practice working with the vocabulary here from the website? And you can take a moment to look back at the skills. So I can give an example. So one of the skills that we've talked about is sort of categorizing. So I was thinking you could ask students to look at these vocabulary words and the different items and maybe sort them by things that you would only use in your car and maybe things you would also want to keep in your house, or things that were specific to a car and maybe things that were more about winter in general or something like that. So doing some kind of categorizing might be a way to build critical thinking skills here.
And as you say that, Stephanie, I see in the middle the big question, why? Why do we need to have a first aid kit? We could be asking that, why would you want sand or kitty litter? Why would you want to have a blanket in your car? Why would you need to have a cell phone charger? So having students think critically about that, using that information from this graphic to draw a conclusion might be helpful.
Yes. And yeah, or now that you mentioned that, Heather, maybe what you could do something like figure out a way, if you were projecting this on a smartboard, maybe you put a piece of paper over that car in the middle. So students were just seeing the words around the outside, the ones on the border, and ask students to tell you, what do all these words have in common? And what's the connection? And then show them, oh, these are all things that might be good to keep in your car in the winter. And Carly said, thinking about potential solutions and possible consequences. Yes. So I think that really gets into the complementing piece. What else could we do with this? We could talk about, well, what kind of a problem might we have that some of these items would help us to solve, right? Or if our car broke down, how could we use these items to help us solve that problem? And Krista has talked about from skill 4 subset C, it would be a great opportunity for using a KWL chart. So to find out, what do students already know about these items and what would they maybe like to learn? So for me, for example, I know what a first aid kit is, and I know what a cell phone charger is. I am not that comfortable. I would have to review how to use jumper cables. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how you connect those properly.
That would be you're giving me ideas as well. And the same with having a spare tire. As you say this, and this is just such a perfect example of a type of lesson for this time of the year. I want to make sure that my spare tire is inflated. So I'm already thinking about myself, right? Flares, exactly. I've never used them either. I don't have a flashlight. So thank you for reminding me. I need to be on the ball. Maybe we'll have an actual winter this year where some of this might be useful.
Yes, yes, all of that. And so, yes, so we've looked at this. Okay, we could use it just to talk about the vocabulary, maybe to make some connections between the items, a KWL chart. And then what else could we do with this or around this general idea? What else could we do to practice critical thinking skills? Is there another piece or activity we could add here? Yes, okay, great. Carly says sequence, right? So like if our car broke down, what would we want to do first, second, third? Yes, that's a great idea. I would imagine for me, if my car broke down, my first step might be to put on my winter hats and gloves and all of that before I stepped out of the car. Yes, exactly. Then I might be next calling AAA with my cell phone using my cell phone charger.
Yeah, not that far behind you there, Stephanie. I would be doing pretty much the same. And I'm also thinking we live in the state with extreme weather. So this is for winter, but we don't want to let summer take us by surprise either, with perhaps not having what we need in our car for summer, or rainstorms. We have a number of rain and hailstorms. So just helping students be prepared for any sort of weather. I also appreciate they have here before a storm, during a storm, and after a storm. I'd like to find out if there are differences, and then we could think about what would be different during or after the storm.
That's a great idea. Again, about that sequence. What do we do before? What do we do during? What do we do after? And I also, working with maybe a little bit higher level students who could do a little bit of research. I know, for example, OSHA has fact sheets or guidelines around how to stay safe in extreme heat, for example. So maybe after we look at winter weather survival, we have students do a little bit of research to learn about surviving in the summer, in the heat. And like you mentioned, maybe doing some comparisons. We could do maybe a writing task where we compared the two seasons and how we need to prepare ourselves would be another great extension on this. And so
yeah, I agree. I'm
this,
also thinking about students who might not have a car. They might be using public transit. So what do they need in order to be prepared? Wear those gloves and hats. I agree with you 100%, Carly. But then also having boots, maybe looking at the weather report in advance to know what clothing you need.
yes. So what we're trying to get across here is, I know a lot of us, I'll speak for myself, I'll use I language. We get into kind of a groove of teaching. Maybe we often use the same materials, or we have our go-to activities and things that we come back to. And I think one of the great things about attending a webinar like this and thinking about the ACES process is it reminds us that even spending a couple of minutes doing this assess and complement, look at all the ideas that came out when we started talking just by looking at this pretty simple graphic here. And so I like to think about how we could maybe refresh or boost our curriculum, our materials, our lessons, if we spend a few minutes doing some of this using the ACES process which makes things, I think, more interesting, both for our students, but also for ourselves, right? Because I know we all sometimes get tired of the same old, same old. And so this is a great time to maybe look to what could be refreshed a little bit in your curriculum. Oh, great. And Krista says, or I'm sorry, Heather says a T-chart. Yes, the T-chart. You can never go wrong with the T-chart. What do I already have and what do I need? Exactly. And Krista says she does a winter weather lesson multiple times throughout the season. There are some great ideas these are some great ideas. Yes, exactly. We can use different skills as well. Wonderful. Okay, great. So that was a little bit about the ACES process, and we will continue on.
Yes, we didn't get to the E, evaluate, and then the S, the study and reflect, and that's going to be your time, friends. Then you evaluate your students' learning, and please take time to do that, but then also evaluate how the lesson went so that you can study, reflect on it, and perhaps make it better the next time.
Mm-hmm.
Steph, you talked about this just a little bit ago about these TIFing methods, and within the course and within the full ACES TIF, there are different TIFing methods, and it is a way for you to have your classroom environment model what students might need to transfer the skills out of the classroom into the other world, okay? Whether that be work, whether that be school, other schools, their children's schools, life, in the community, all sorts of ways. So we put these into different TIFing methods, okay? And this is where we use the TIF as a verb. We love to TIF things. So we have routines. So it's a sequence of actions that are regularly followed. It's a routine process. Some of those routines, when they are then internalized, they can become norms, and they're just standards of acceptable behavior or expectations. Learning tasks formats, we were just going on about the T-chart. I love T-charts, and those are routine structures for activities and tasks. And then language, you bring in the vocabulary and language structures to allow students to be using the skills safely in the classroom, but then transfer it outside. And then technology, try to think about the technology that mirrors what students might see or use on the outside. So if students are having to reply maybe to their insurance companies about, or AAA, maybe we can have them practice writing those emails and such. So just trying to mirror that environment that students might need to see in the future. So this is what we mean by TIF methods. Is there anything you wanted to add to about the TIF methods, Stephanie?
I think you covered it, and you talked about the mirroring. Yes,
Yeah.
I've always thought is such a great metaphor. For some reason, out of all the ACES training, that is one of the little nuggets that has embedded most deeply in my brain. This idea that we create and implement the routines and norms and learning tasks and language in our classrooms we want our students to be using in their target environment, in the hope that if they get comfortable using it in the supportive, comfortable atmosphere of our classrooms, they will feel confident to use it out in the real world when they need to. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for the classes that I've been teaching recently, it's we don't read a story. We don't read stories. We read a passage. We read a text so that students are saying, well, according to that passage, so that that's the language that they're going to be reading when they get into college. The professor is not going to say, we're going to read a story tomorrow. No, it's most likely going to be a long passage. Here we go.
All right. And so of these TIFing methods, the two that seem to, at least in the past, have kind of been tricky for folks is the difference between a routine and a norm. And so we just wanted to, first of all, I will say, I don't think it's worth spending a lot of time thinking about because it doesn't really I don't think it matters if you can on the spot define routine and norm. It's more just to understand that routines are things that you introduce in your class. You might have a warm-up routine, you might have an exit routine, you might have instructional routines like everybody knows how to use the computers to get onto Schoology to find assignments, right? That's kind of an instructional routine. You might have routines around what to do when you're absent and all of that. So routines are things that are introduced and then reinforced through repetition, right? Regular repetition. We know that routines make our students comfortable. It's one way to lower students' defenses, making them more prepared and open for learning and receiving new information. The way I think about a norm being different is a norm is when a student sort of internalizes a lot of those routines and can take them with them into other situations. So for example, I might have a routine in my class that students mute themselves when they join because I teach online. I also know that that's sort of what's expected in most of the classes in our program that are online. And so it becomes a norm when students take what they've learned in my class and then also do it in Heather's class, for example. So not super important to exactly understand the difference, but it is a question that sometimes comes up. All right, let's see here. We've got language on the CASES test. Yes, so when we want to model academic language around directions or the type of language we often see in test questions, I do think those are exactly examples of using academic language or just language. Okay, so we wanted to direct your attention to one of the activities from the course, which is thinking about TIF methods. And we'd like to invite people to share. If you have any routines or norms that you use with your students, in particularly around critical thinking, could you share those in the chat? So I think Krista's got an example here about trying to intentionally incorporate language from the CASES test. I do the same. If I write or am wording questions to use in my reading for social studies class, I often try to kind of mirror the types of questions I might see on the TABE test or the GED. And I know you do the same thing, Heather. So would anyone else like to quickly share maybe an example of a routine that they might use with their students or a learning task format like our T-chart? It'd be great to see those suggestions in the chat.
And while people are thinking, Stephanie, I'm going to just share that another activity I do is to try to bring in the language. Like I wonder at the end of a reading passage or after we've done an activity to allow students to expand it, to ask their own questions, and then perhaps go and seek answers for those questions.
That's a great example. So feel free to share any of your own routines in the chat. And then we can also share with you, and I know Carly chatted out this link in case you're looking for inspiration around routines in particular. There is a ACES routine library or collection, I guess I should say. So these are some routines that have been submitted by people, your peers in Minnesota ABE. And we would love to grow this collection. So there is a way that you can submit your own routine. There is a document that you complete. So it's kind of in a consistent format. You fill that out, you share it with Carly, and then Carly will post it to the collection, add it to the collection, and I believe you will get 1 CEU for sharing your routine. So there are some great ones in here to check out. And Krista shared that Liddy Rich in Harmony does a great routine using breakout rooms. She explains every day how to ask follow-up questions. I use her model and her routine. This practice to me is good for effective. Oh, that's fantastic. Yes. I've
So
also,
maybe Krista, you can encourage Liddy to submit her wonderful routine, or maybe you submit it on her behalf.
yes, I've seen something like this where students sit in a group of 4 and each person in the group has a role. So person 1 chooses a question to ask, person 2 responds, person 3 asks a follow-up question, and then person 4 summarizes what they heard, which I think is a great activity. Oh, she does the role exactly like that.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I have seen that in action and thought it was fantastic.
So that is great. And feel free if after today's webinar, you think about something, always go back to Atlas. They're the one-stop shop for pretty much everything adult education. And you can find this link on there to submit your own routine. We're going to move along and look closer at another category, which is the self-management category. This is module 6 in the ACES Foundations course. So again, as Stephanie was saying, the course follows the same format, which is perhaps a learning task format, but within Canvas, where you have an overview of the category, the skills, sub-skills. Let's take a look. You can follow along on pages 31 through 36.
All right. And here is again, the definition in the TIF. All of the categories start out with the definition, so we'll let you read that. Our image here, not Canva created, but it is a really great image showing using a calendar, using a Post-it note in order to help us keep organized, which is definitely part of self-management. My daughter, well, maybe if she hears me talking to you, won't like that I share this, but she recently lost her phone as she had her phone taken away for a period of a month, actually. And she, during that time, became quite forgetful. She would do things like leave in the morning and forget her lunch or forget to bring certain things home from school. And when we would ask her, why are you suddenly so forgetful? She mentioned it's because she always would put reminders in her phone, and without her phone, she just couldn't think of another method for helping her to stay organized. So we suggested she add some Post-it notes to her backpack.
Yes, and I also know, Stephanie, that you have an exquisite book and calendar layout, the old style that also works quite well, like this one, the paper-based. But I also think about glasses. I had a student come in for testing and they forgot their reading glasses. Well, what sort of test score are they going to have if they're not able to read? But some of these just self-management reminders of what we all need on a daily basis.
All right, so our 3 skills from the self-management categories: set realistic goals and work independently to achieve them, manage information and materials for one's own learning and goals, manage time effectively to complete tasks. So these are the 3 core or main skills in this category.
And I think they're skills we can all use as adults, right?
Absolutely.
Ooh, went a little too fast there. Let's take a look here so you can see on the far left, students determine a goal and write down 3 action steps to accomplish their stated goal. I need blank. For my students, it's GED, and I will do blank, blank, and blank to obtain it or earn it. Another one, students establish an organizational system for different kinds of information and materials. Students choose tools appropriate for their needs. It could be in a binder, an online folder, or Post-it notes on your backpack. Okay, whatever works, right? We just have to make it work. You can see another one. Students are able to use a device to create an online calendar with schoolwork and family obligations. And then I think that next step, friends, is to prioritize those activities. I really like that. What's more important and such. I think if we bring in that weather lesson, we've got other things to think about, right?
Okay. And then once again, we have the complete TIF with our activity grid. This begins on page 31. And so I'm going to turn to page 31. I invite you to do the same. And we're going to ask you to do what you did before with the critical thinking category. And again, we'd love to hear from everyone today. So if you didn't get a chance to share maybe critical thinking, you couldn't think of anything, but maybe you could look at the self-management category and try to choose one of these activities you might be able to use with your learners. Even if you wanted to say something like, I'm interested in this activity, but I don't know how I would make it work with my learners, you're in a group right now where we'd be happy to provide some ideas for adapting anything. So if we go to the next slide, I think we have those directions again. Oh, yes, and Heather pointed out, I will take responsibility for this. I am sure I made a cutting and pasting or duplicating mistake. So there is a little error in the course, Carly, where this here should say self-management and it says critical thinking. So that's a small thing that I'm sure would take no time at all to fix. So we're thinking about self-management. We'd love to hear people's ideas for using one of these activities. So I'm going to look, see what I could use here.
Yeah, think about a sample activity for those self-management skills, what tweaks would be needed, share in the chat. While you're thinking, I might share with you all what we do at Minneapolis Adult Education. A lot of students have access through our learning management system to their student portal. So when I think about their monitoring progress and achieving one's goal, they're able to go in and look at their scores. They don't have to wait for a teacher to tell them what the arbitrary number is on whatever test they're taking. They can go in and they're managing that time. And it really puts a lot of stress off the teacher, and students are owning their own learning. And I really appreciate how we have that.
That's great. Lori was pointing out because she works in the jail that students can't use cell phones. And so they have to get organized, you know, quote unquote, the old fashioned way, using paper, pencils, colored folders, those types of things to stay organized. And Krista says, my big thing with online teaching is for my learners to put in the chat when they are going to leave class. Yes, absolutely. Or I am big into asking students to let me know if they're stepping away. So we use Schoology conferences, which has a way for students to change like their status. And so if a student is stepping away, I ask them to let me know, because otherwise I might put that student, say, in a breakout room, and then they're not really there, and then the other student doesn't have a partner. So that's a big thing that I repeat, is let me know if you're stepping away. Carly's talking about organizing files on a flash drive or Google Drive, making folders with subheadings. Yes. I can
file management is like a graduate level course, right? Just to make sure you have everything that you need.
One of the things that I do for my adult diploma students is we have created a number of different checklists. So when you finish this, you do this, And we put their materials in a folder in Google Drive. And one of the things I've started doing is I give each of the documents a name that starts with a number. So the first thing they do is 1 dash whatever the thing is, 2 dash whatever the thing is, so that it's literally in there in the order that they're going to go through it. And that's just another layer of helping them to stay organized, along with different checklists and such that they use to keep track of what they finished. Because we used to constantly get questions like, what do I do next? What do I do now? And we're trying to make students responsible for keeping track of those things.
Exactly, Stephanie. And I think even for this ACES Foundations course, there is a checklist so that you know when you're done and you're completing this course.
And Dawn, thank you, Dawn, says working with students in college prep, it is a combination of paper and digital organization. Yes. And Krista says she likes that phrase, stepping away. Yes, I mean, I tell my students, I understand you're at home, I'm at home sometimes, and maybe something comes up, the doorbell rings, or your baby is crying, or your dog is barking at a neighbor and you need to move and step away. And that is fine. You absolutely can do that. And if you just let us know, I've stepped away, I'm back. And even you could have your students use shorthand, you know, SA for stepping away and B in the chat for back. When I know when Heather and I both, you do something very similar when students are, say, answering questions on their own during our online classes, we have them type the letter D. I use D. I think Heather might have, maybe she uses D. I have them type D for done, or you might use F for finished in the chat so that I can keep track of who's finished and I know when we're ready to move on or go over the answers.
Yeah, I use D for done, but then when I can move to the next slide, I wait for, I say I need 5 G's, 5 goes, or 5 letter G's, like go ahead. And then W is wait, because someone is trying to maybe make a note. And we come with a norm in our class that we're going to respect, but we'll move on, and then we'll just wait. And it's worked out really well for that. I'm going to move us along here because I want us to think about self-management with that ACES process. So assess, complement, evaluate, study, and reflect. We're going to do that. We won't watch this video, but we will think about reflecting on that process, again, with this National Weather Service sort of frame of a lesson. So think about the task. We're going to look at the ACES process for self-management. What is a skill, sub-skill that you think you could help your learners develop with this framework of an activity or lesson, and how would you complement it? Thinking about self-management again, not so much the critical thinking of why we need to know how to use a jumper cable, but now it's going to be maybe it's Stephanie, I'm just thinking out loud, maybe it's having a step-by-step maybe sheet on how to use a jumper cable.
Yeah, I think that's great that I create and I pack in my car and then I forget about it, but it's there when I need those jumper cables. For me, we'd probably need pictures, maybe some pictures to show me what to do. Another idea I have, which is very simple, but just, you know, having these things like in a box that's in my car in the winter, maybe I store it in my garage or the basement when it's not needed. And I maybe put a reminder in my phone to check my supplies in, say, October before it really gets too cold, so that I know I have everything and that my emergency kit is ready to go. A friend of mine kind of taught me this. For years, she's done it with all of her camping supplies. She keeps them all in one box. Before we go camping, then she just has to check that one place to make sure she has everything. She's not running around checking 100 different places for supplies. And I will tell you, she always has everything. And that's some organization I have admired and tried to use as my own.
That's your smart friend. It's good to have those smart friends with us. That's the SM, it's for your smart friend. But they have incorporated these self-management skills, and we look at each other and you look at someone, why do they seem so organized? And they can help you with those skills. And this is what our learners would need to have. And maybe it's, where do you go to get a first aid kit? And making a list of, okay, I'm going to go to Target. What things can I get at Target from this list?
Mm-hmm. Or at, thinking again, so combining maybe self-management and some critical thinking. I need to buy jumper cables, and I'm going to look at 3 websites, like maybe Target and Walmart and maybe Amazon, and I'm going to compare prices, and then I'm going to make a decision about which would be the best place for me to get my jumper cables from.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I like how you're already complementing your lesson and bringing in some other activities. Does anyone else want to share ways that you might want to complement this sort of lesson with the self-management skills? I know for myself, next week I have an appointment to get my snow tires on. And that's what I do after the first snowfall. I make an appointment to get the tires changed. That's my self-management. It's in my phone calendar.
Electronic
Ooh.
reminders, yes. Yes. Patsy just got her snow tires on. I think I have all season tires, but I do something similar to remind myself to have Centerpoint come out, Centerpoint come out and check my furnace every fall to make sure that I'm not going to be stuck with a furnace that doesn't fire up when I need it. And they change the filter and those things. And Krista's going to try using that stepping away language. That's great, Krista.
Yeah, and Krista, we're lucky, as Stephanie said, in our learning management system, that it just says away. So students can just click an icon and it says that they're away. We just are reminding them they need to do that. Okay, Patsy's got her notification in her calendar. See, look at how we support each other, friends. We're smart friends helping each other out. Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure about Zoom. Our Zoom officials, do you know if there is something within an icon that you can say that you step away? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either, but let me look around. I usually just put stepping away in the chat. So let me look into it.
Or I think about how when I'm in meetings and people say BRB, be right back. So that could be another way.
I just found it. There's a be right back under the react button in Zoom. And if you notice, I'm just going to hit it. And if you look at the participant list, it shows up now.
Oh, I'm going off. I'm gonna check this. Oh, I guess I don't see it, Patsy.
Oh, let's see. It was in React and then be right back. And then Hourglass shows up.
Oh, I see a cup of
Oh, I see it now.
Dawn's, and then I see Hourglass by Patsy. So it's
Dawn
above the participant's name in the list of participants, I think. Yep.
Because Dawn went off to get a cup of coffee and Patsy will be right back. So I love that. Okay.
I don't know how to do the coffee one, Dawn. You have to tell us.
Okay. Yeah, so look at, I love it. Krista, you've got something that you can take away right away. I'm away. Carly's going off to get coffee as well.
Now Krista's got a heart. Okay, we all learned something in real time today. So the TIF methods again, we just went over these. We're not going to go over them again, but we are hoping you might be willing to share a quick example of a routine or language or technology that you have used to support self-management skills. I think we've talked a lot about, naming files in Drive or having different ways maybe that we store documents on our computers. And that, of course, falls under the idea of technology. And, having students use these different icons, I think that might be both technology and routine.
Yeah, and not just students, but participants too. We're all learning. I love it.
Mhm. All right, so we'd love to see if anyone's got anything else they'd like to add, an idea of something they do with their students, that would be fantastic.
Stephanie, I think you might do this too. And Krista, you might, but in the online environment, I can have a lot of students enter and I don't get to see all their names at one time. So it's supposed to be a routine that when they come into the classroom, they say hello. So then in the chat, I can see their names pop up. So perhaps that is that routine that then could transfer to a norm. Maybe in the future, we'll get to the sort of pronouns use when students come in, but I think it really depends on the system that we're all using.
Okay.
Stephanie, I know you've got your own self-management to take care of, but we got your back.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I will see you
Yeah.
next time. Heather's going to finish off with Carly and Patsy. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. We'll move forward. We don't have that much more. I'm just so thankful that we learned this activity in Zoom. We wanted to give you all an activity that is also part of the course for anyone who is thinking about perhaps enrolling into the course. But again, we have this transitions map. This is that final assignment for the ACES Foundations course. So you've got to think about that student with whom you work. And if you don't work with students, we have that learner profile of Myra again. And then we'd like for you to choose at least one of the two categories. So you could choose critical thinking or self-management that we've been discussing in today's webinar. And then complete the student's transitions map with the skills and the sub-skills and maybe routines that you will incorporate. So for example, for self-management, Krista, I'm just thinking for you, you could say, I'm going to have students monitor their progress in the classroom live and by using that stepping away or I'll be right back. So that would be that TIF category, the skill, sub-skill, and then that routine. So this is one of those assignments. It might seem really daunting when you download it from the course, but as we have just all shared in the chat, we are already doing a lot of this work. You can just put it onto this student's transition map. We'll talk about it, as Stephanie said, when we all come back in December. And if you need to, you can click in the chat. Carly shared the transitions map. Again, that final assignment. And then we have this learner profile. If you yourself, some of you are managers, you might not be working directly one-on-one with the student, but then you could be using this activity that is part of the ACES course, ACES Foundations course. So we want to help those of you who might be enrolled in the course to get over that finish line. And a lot of this is what we're talking about it right now. If we're not doing the course, do this too. It would be helpful, Krista, but you don't have to. And Krista, you might want to even think about enrolling in the course since you're already doing some of this work, and then you can get some of those CEUs. But part of finishing the course is so much of what we've been discussing today, that self-management, right? So we are thinking about perhaps setting a deadline with completion and a calendar, maybe with pings and dings, or a checklist with milestones when you finish an activity. You could create a routine in a study environment. I know for me, when I study, I need to go to a coffee shop that's quiet and have my coffee, and then I can really study. Find a study buddy. There's folks who are here within this webinar, or maybe there's someone else at your site that you can be learning with. And we'd like to find out from you, could there be a routine or a norm or something that would help anyone get across the finish line that we haven't thought of? You could share in the chat. Carly could be an excellent study buddy. She leads the ACES Foundations course. And I think she'd be your #1 cheerleader to help you get across the line. So we're just going to do a short wrap up question or answers. If you have any about either the course or either of the categories that we looked at today, that critical thinking and the self-management. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, we're open to them all, friends. And if it comes later, as some things come to my brain after the fact, you can always reach out to us. Carly is just an email away. Thanks, Carly. And I'm going to turn it over to you and Patsy, and I want to thank you all. Yes, I agree with that, Dawn. It's just having the time. That is so needed, the time to evaluate and then study and reflect.
Yeah, thank you, Heather, and of course Stephanie, who isn't here anymore. But just a reminder, this is part 2 of the 3-part webinar series. So we will be back December 10th, same time, 2 to 3:30, and Stephanie and Heather will help wrap it up with the last 2 categories. And I shared in the chat an announcement doc with future professional development dates coming up throughout the rest of the school year. And then there's called a transitions 1-pager. So it's other training and resources related to adult career pathways, ACES, TIF, and anything and everything transitions in adult basic education. So lots of helpful resources. And I just want to thank everybody for being here this afternoon. We will be sending out another evaluation. If you attended this webinar in a few days, you'll get an email. And then we're going to hold off on doing CEUs until the 3rd webinar in the series. There is that extra incentive. If you attend all 3, we're going to bump up your CEUs. And then if you do the Canvas course, there's additional CEUs there. So you would really be collecting them if you do all of this stuff. So hopefully we'll see you for the 3rd webinar in this series.
And thank you, friends. Yeah,
I'm
the
just gonna stop
CEU
the
bump up is
recording.
real. I love it. Thank you, Atlas, for doing all the groundwork to make that happen.
Absolutely.